Have you ever really minded asking what the mind actually is? Not how it works, not what it does, but what it is. We often lump three words together: brain, mind, and consciousness. But each describes a different layer of who we are. The brain is structure, about 1.3 kilograms of tissue, neurons, chemicals, and electrical impulses. You can scan it, dissect it, measure its activity. The mind is what the brain does. It's not a place, it's a process. Thinking, remembering, imagining, deciding. It's the software running on the brain's hardware. And then there's consciousness, something else entirely. Not what the system does, but what it feels like to be the system. It's the raw sense of being aware. The mind sits between brain and consciousness. It's the layer where experience is organized, where patterns form, where the world is modeled and made usable. From an evolutionary perspective, minds didn't evolve to solve equations or write poetry. They evolved to help organisms survive. A mind lets you simulate the world internally, before acting on it. It lets you imagine, plan, hesitate, learn. It replaces blind reflex with informed decision, and that gave certain organisms, like us, a massive advantage. But the mind didn't stop at survival. It became a space for memory, language, reflection, creativity. It became where we carry not just the world, but ourselves. Still, we don't experience reality directly. We experience it through the mind's model of it, filtered by attention, shaped by emotion, colored by memory. Every mind builds its own version of the world and lives inside it, and yet the mind is never static. It changes with experience, learns, rewires, reinterprets. The mind you had a year ago is not the same one you have now. So what is the mind? It's not your thoughts, not your memories, not your identity. It's the system that holds them all together long enough for you to say, me. You can't see it, but everything you see through it. Understanding what the mind is isn't just the start of this journey. It shapes how we understand everything that follows. Where does mind come from? It's one thing to ask what the mind is. It's another to ask how it came to exist at all. The earliest forms of life had no thoughts, no memories, just chemical reactions and simple reflexes. A jellyfish pulses through the water without a brain. A worm withdraws from light without needing to know what light is. But eventually, reactivity wasn't enough. Survival started favoring something more: anticipation. Moving toward food before sensing it, avoiding danger before feeling pain. This shift from reaction to prediction is where the foundations of the mind began. Nervous systems evolved to process more complex information. Neurons clustered into networks. Simple light-detecting cells became image-forming eyes. Reflex turned into response. Response became strategy. Minds didn't cause brains. They arose when brains grew complex enough to model the world internally and choose action over reflex. With time, organisms gained more than sensation. They built internal maps of threats, opportunities, outcomes. The world became something to think through, not just react to. Thought replaced trial and error. Awareness emerged, not all at once, but in stages, from raw perception to memory, from simple learning to imagination, from experience to self-awareness. The mind wasn't built in a moment. It accumulated, layer by layer, from sensation to perception, from memory to imagination, from instinct to identity. And with each leap, nature selected for minds that offered an advantage. So, where does the mind come from? It didn't begin with a spark. It began with complexity, and every new function, prediction, memory, simulation, moved it one step closer to what we now recognize as the inner world. What was the need for a mind? Imagine a world without minds. Organisms react. They move toward light, away from heat. They eat. They reproduce. But every move is immediate. Every danger must be faced directly. Every mistake is paid for in full. Without a mind, there is no second guessing, no rehearsal, no imagining a better move before committing to action. And as the environment grew more complex, more predators, more competition, less predictable food, this simple strategy became increasingly dangerous. Minds became necessary because reflex alone couldn't handle uncertainty. A mind solves a fundamental problem. How do you act in a world where not every danger can be seen and not every opportunity can be sensed? Without a mind, organisms must trial and error their way through survival. With a mind, organisms can predict, simulate, and avoid fatal mistakes without having to suffer them first. A mind allows mental modeling, imagining an outcome before it happens, evaluating choices without physically testing each one, storing knowledge and applying it to new, unseen situations. This is not a bonus feature. It is a survival mechanism. In complex environments, flexibility beats reflex. Adaptation within a single lifetime becomes more important than rigid behaviors inherited across generations. The mind gives an organism an internal testing ground, a way to run experiments on possible futures before risking real-world consequences. It also makes long-term strategy possible. Minds can delay gratification, track investments, maintain social bonds, and recognize deception. All abilities that require holding multiple possibilities in mind, not just reacting to the present moment. In social animals, the need becomes even sharper. Minds must model other minds, understanding not just the environment, but the intentions, beliefs, and future actions of others. In groups, a mind is not a luxury, it's an arms race. Without a mind, existence is immediate and narrow. With a mind, existence expands, forward and backward in time, outward into networks of others, inward into self-reflection. So what was the need for a mind? The need was for survival beyond reflex, for planning in the face of uncertainty, for simulating dangers instead of falling victim to them, for organizing action in a world that changes faster than instinct can adapt. The mind isn't an accident of evolution. It is the first virtual reality system ever built, and the only one where the cost of failure was life itself. What does mind do? We often assume the mind is just for thinking, but thinking is only a small part of what it actually does. At its core, the mind is a model-building system. It transforms raw input, light, sound, heat, texture, into meaningful experience. You don't see photons, you see objects. You don't hear vibrations, you hear voices, music, context. The mind turns sensation into story. But that's just the surface. The mind doesn't only process the present. It navigates through time. It recalls past events, some clearly, others through distortion. It also projects possible futures, running internal rehearsals long before any action begins. Psychologists call this mental time travel. It allows us to predict, imagine, and plan. Then there's abstraction. The mind can take one specific experience, someone lying to you, and generalize it into a broader rule. People can be untrustworthy. From patterns, we build beliefs. From beliefs, expectations. The mind constructs frameworks to interpret the world, not just record it. It also tracks the self. Despite change, the mind maintains a sense of identity. It remembers your name, your goals, your preferences, your history. Even when everything around you changes, there's a thread of continuity holding the you together. That thread is maintained by the mind. Socially, the mind is an interpreter. It reads tone, posture, body language. It models what others are thinking. This is known as theory of mind, our ability to simulate other minds. Without it, trust, empathy, and society wouldn't exist. Then there's creativity. The mind doesn't just reflect the world, it reconfigures it. It takes fragments of experience and combines them into things that have never existed. Art, metaphors, inventions, stories. And when belief and reality conflict, the mind protects itself. This is cognitive dissonance. It bends perception to preserve coherence. Even when it distorts, it's trying to maintain stability. So, what does the mind do? It senses, it remembers, it predicts, it decides, it imagines, it connects. It models the world and your place in it. It doesn't just process life, it builds the experience of living it. That's what the mind does, not just to survive, but to turn information into meaning. How does mind create thoughts? You think remember, imagine, decide. But all of it begins in silence, inside a 1.3 kilogram organ wrapped in folds of living tissue. At the center of it all are neurons, roughly 86 billion of them. Each neuron connects to thousands of others, forming trillions of possible pathways. Alone, they're silent. But together, they fire in patterns that give rise to everything from speech to memory to fear. A thought begins as a pattern of electrical activity. One neuron fires, then another, and the cascade spreads. Signals can travel up to 250 miles per hour, but it's not just about speed, it's about structure. The brain organizes itself into specialized circuits, some for vision, some for language, some for attention or emotion. Between these neurons are microscopic gaps called synapses. When one neuron fires, it releases neurotransmitters, chemical messengers that cross the gap and influence the next neuron. Some excite, some inhibit. The timing and intensity of these signals form the language of thought. But thoughts aren't isolated events. They're built on integration. Different regions of the brain work in constant communication. The prefrontal cortex analyzes, the hippocampus recalls, the limbic system colors it with emotion, and when they synchronize, thought emerges, like musicians in an orchestra playing a single score. Even more remarkable, this system is self-organizing. Neurons that fire together tend to wire together. That means learning, memory, and even imagination reshape the brain. New thoughts leave physical traces. Experiences literally change your wiring. Your thoughts also have rhythm. Brainwaves, slow in sleep, fast in focus, coordinate different regions. These rhythms help keep the brain's activity aligned, like keeping time in a symphony. And yet, for all we know about the mechanics, one mystery remains. How do these signals become meaning? We know the pathway. A signal fires in your motor cortex, your hand moves. Another loop activates, and you recall a memory. But what turns these biological events into conscious experience? That's the part we don't fully understand. The leap from physical signal to felt thought is still unexplained. It's where neuroscience meets philosophy. So how does the brain create thought? Through neurons and synapses, through circuits and rhythms, through chemistry, electricity, and plasticity. But also through something we don't fully grasp. Maybe thought is what happens when a biological system becomes complex enough to simulate the world and itself. And maybe the next frontier isn't just mapping the brain, It's learning to listen to its patterns and recognizing ourselves inside them. When did the study of mind started? It didn't begin in a lab. It began around fires, under stars, in silence. Long before the word mind existed, humans noticed something strange happening behind their eyes. Something that could remember, imagine, desire, and reflect. Something that wasn't the body, but seemed to live inside it. In ancient India around 1500 BCE, early Vedic texts spoke of manas, a subtle internal faculty for thought and emotion. The Upanishads later introduced Atman, the inner self, not as an isolated identity, but as something connected to the entire cosmos. The mind was seen as both individual and universal. In ancient Egypt, the soul was divided into Ka and Ba. One stayed with the body, the other wandered in dreams. Egyptians preserved the brain during mummification, but some believed thought came from the heart. Others thought it came from breath or spirit. Then came Greece. Around 500 BCE, philosophers like Heraclitus and Parmenides began asking, what is thought? What is being? Plato offered one of the first structural theories of mind, a tripartite soul with reason, emotion, and desire. Aristotle, more empirically minded, described the mind in terms of functions, perception, memory, imagination, and reasoning. In China, Taoist thinkers viewed mind not as a substance, but as a flow, a process aligned with nature. In early Buddhist thought, the mind was not fixed, but constantly changing. What we call a self was considered an illusion, a moving collection of processes mistaken for something stable. The study of the mind didn't stay within philosophy. During the Islamic Golden Age, thinkers like Avicenna and Al-Farabi wrote about how thought might rise from the body and how intellect could transcend it. In medieval Europe, the mind was studied through theology, through ideas of free will, moral reasoning, and divine intention. The real shift came in the 1600s with René Descartes. He asked, "What can I know for certain?" His answer, "I think, therefore I am." With that, the mind became not just a subject of reflection, but the foundation of all certainty, a starting point for a new kind of inquiry. From there, the study of the mind branched into science, first with early psychology, then with cognitive science, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence. Today, it spans everything from brain imaging to behavioral economics. But the search didn't begin in labs or journals. It began with a pause, a breath, a question. What is this that thinks? What is this that dreams? What is this that wonders what it is? And it's a question we still haven't finished asking. What is the biology of mind? When we ask what the mind is, we often leap to thoughts, feelings, or awareness. But underneath all of it lies something more basic. Biology, a structure, a system, a living architecture designed not to think abstractly, but to keep an organism alive. The mind begins with the body. Even before the brain, life evolved to respond. Single-celled organisms react to light, heat, pressure. They don't have minds, but they sense. And sensing is the first step toward awareness. Fast forward hundreds of millions of years, and nervous systems emerge. Networks of cells designed to coordinate movement, track changes, adapt to threat. These systems begin simple, nerve nets in jellyfish, ganglia in worms. But over time they layer, branch, fold. Eventually, biology gives us the brain. Not a singular control center, but a decentralized modular network. Different regions specialize: vision, movement, memory, emotion, communicating through electric signals and chemical messengers. And yet, the brain doesn't float in isolation. It's embedded. Every signal is tied to a heartbeat. Every thought echoes hormonal rhythms. What we call mind is shaped by hunger, fatigue, temperature, posture. The brain interprets the world through the body, and the body through the brain. This is called embodied cognition. The mind isn't just in the body, it is the body processing itself. Even more striking is the role of feedback. The biology of the mind is not linear, it loops. Signals travel from the body to the brain and back again. You don't just feel fear and then run. Sometimes you run, and your brain decides you're afraid. Biology is not cause, then effect. It's cause, effect, response, update, repeat. And this system didn't arise overnight. Evolution built it piece by piece. Older brain structures, like the brainstem and limbic system, manage survival, breathing, reflexes, emotion. Newer parts, like the neocortex, handle abstract thinking, language, simulation. But even the newest parts are stacked on ancient foundations. That's why the mind sometimes contradicts itself. One part wants logic, another wants safety, another wants approval. Biology layered these motives across time, and now they all live together in the same skull. So when we speak about the biology of the mind, we're not talking about a single organ. We're talking about a living system, cells, tissues, networks, hormones, feedback loops, all wired together to turn sensing into meaning, meaning into memory, and memory into action. This system doesn't think because it was designed to. It thinks because, over time, thinking helped it survive. The mind is not a ghost in the machine. It's the machine learning to imagine itself. And underneath every moment of awareness, the biology is still running, quietly, continuously, doing its ancient job. What is the chemistry of mind? Every thought you've ever had was soaked in chemistry. But unlike the electrical pulses that travel through neurons, chemistry works slower, deeper. It lingers. It shapes how long a feeling lasts, how strong a desire becomes, how easily a memory settles in. At the core of this chemistry are neurotransmitters, tiny molecules that carry messages from one neuron to the next. One neuron fires. At the end of its axon, it releases chemicals into the synapse. These chemicals drift across the gap and bind to receptors on the next neuron, triggering it or silencing it. But not all neurotransmitters do the same thing. Dopamine fuels motivation and reward. It spikes when we anticipate a goal, not just when we reach it. That's why it governs addiction as much as ambition. Serotonin helps regulate mood, sleep, appetite, and social behaviour. A drop in serotonin can shift your worldview, making everything feel heavier, slower, greyer. Norepinephrine kicks in during stress, sharpening attention and quickening the pulse. It helps you focus in danger, but can make stillness feel impossible. GABA calms the system, preventing overexcitation. Without it, thoughts race and rest disappears. Endorphins mask pain and induce pleasure. They're the reason a deep laugh, a long run, or a moment of connection can feel like relief. And beyond neurotransmitters, the brain is flooded with hormones. Long-range chemical messengers like cortisol, oxytocin, and adrenaline. These don't travel neuron to neuron. They move through the bloodstream, adjusting the emotional weather of your entire system. Oxytocin deepens trust and bonding. Cortisol prepares you for stress, but over time, too much wears the body down. Testosterone and estrogen don't just shape the body. They shape emotion, decision-making, even risk tolerance. This chemical web is constantly adjusting. Your brain is not chemically neutral. It's always leaning one way or another, primed for caution or confidence, openness, or withdrawal. And while we like to think that thoughts come first, often it's chemistry that sets the stage. You don't feel hopeful and then get a dopamine hit. You get a dopamine hit, and then the world seems full of possibility. Even the placebo effect, long dismissed as imagination, is powered by real chemical shifts, belief triggering biology. So what is the chemistry of the mind? It's not just mood swings or mental states. It's the hidden script behind every behaviour, thought, and shift in attention. A molecular conversation running beneath the dialogue of consciousness. The mind is not made of chemicals, but it listens to them. And sometimes the smallest molecule can steer the biggest story. What is the physics of mind? The brain is made of matter, but the mind, the movement, the thought, the feeling, feels like something else. Still, if it exists in the universe, it must follow its rules. And those rules begin with physics. At its simplest, physics studies how things change, how systems store energy, move, evolve, and decay. So what happens when we apply that lens, not to stars or particles, but to thought? One starting point is energy. Your brain, though small, uses about 20% of your body's energy. Every thought is an exchange, a cascade of ions, a shift in electrical charge, a chemical event triggered and reset. But the energy itself isn't thinking. It's the organization of it that matters. And that brings us to information. In 1990, physicist John Wheeler offered a phrase that still echoes through both science and philosophy. It from bit. He proposed that everything in the universe, even particles, even space, might emerge from information, not substance, but distinction, yes versus no, bit by bit. So what if the mind isn't just running on information, but is made of it? Neuroscience already leans this way. Thoughts aren't just electrical pulses, they're structured pulses, patterns, signals that can be encoded, compressed, translated. In this view, the brain becomes an information processing system, and the mind becomes a story that information tells itself. And physics adds another idea, entropy, the measure of disorder. Every system tends to drift toward chaos unless energy is used to hold it together. The mind pushes against that tide. It organizes, predicts, simulates. It makes meaning out of noise. When you learn something, your brain reduces uncertainty. It increases order. It reshapes entropy into structure. And every time it does, there's a physical cost. Tiny, measurable amounts of energy converted into insight. Some physicists even wonder if consciousness is tied to integration, the binding of information across systems. The more information is linked and irreducible, the richer the experience. This echoes what some neuroscientists call the phi value, a number representing how much information is being unified in the brain. And then there's the quantum question. Some speculate that consciousness may not be purely classical, that at the smallest scales, in the flicker of ions or the coherence of molecules, there may be quantum effects shaping awareness. It's still unproven. But the question remains, if physics governs everything, does it also govern the flicker of thought? So what is the physics of the mind? It's the search for a bridge between energy and meaning, between patterns and perception. It's the idea that thought is not some magical exception to the universe, but another ripple inside it, structured, costly, and maybe governed by laws we haven't fully discovered. The mind might not be made of light or matter, but it moves like them, and it obeys something deeper than biology. A rhythm written into the code of the cosmos. Where does consciousness come from? Every thought you've ever had. Every sound, color, memory, feeling. All of it happens inside your head. But why does it feel like anything at all? Your brain is a physical system. Cells firing, chemicals flowing, circuits activating. But somehow, those signals don't just process information. They create an inner world, a subjective point of view, a place where the universe is felt. This is consciousness, and no one fully knows how it works. We can explain the mechanics. The brain receives input from the senses, processes it in networks of neurons, and produces output, movement, speech, memory. But that's the easy part. The hard part is this. Why should any of it come with an experience? Why doesn't your brain do all that in the dark without awareness? This is what philosopher David Chalmers called the hard problem of consciousness. Not how the brain functions, but why its functions are accompanied by feeling. Why seeing the color red isn't just data processing, but something you experience. One major theory is integrated information theory, IIT. It suggests consciousness arises from the degree to which information is interconnected. The more unified and irreducible the system, the richer the conscious experience. Think of it like a symphony. If each instrument played in isolation, there'd be no music. But when they're synchronized, something emerges that wasn't there before. Another is global workspace theory, GWT. It proposes that consciousness is what happens when information is made globally available across the brain, broadcast like a spotlight to multiple systems. What you become aware of is simply what wins that internal competition for attention. Others go deeper. Some argue that consciousness might be a fundamental property of the universe, like space, time, or mass. According to panpsychism, even particles might carry a trace of awareness. Not thoughts, not feelings, just a primitive glimmer of experience. And from that, minds may emerge through complex arrangements of matter. And then there are those who suggest it's all illusion, that consciousness doesn't exist the way we think it does. It only feels real because the brain creates a convincing story. But illusion or not, it's the most undeniable part of existence. You might doubt what you know, you might question what you remember, but you can't deny the fact that you're experiencing something right now. So, what gives rise to consciousness? Maybe it's integration, maybe it's information, maybe it's a hidden law of nature we haven't discovered yet. But whatever it is, it gives life depth. It turns matter into meaning. How many levels of consciousness are there? We often talk about consciousness like it's a switch, on or off, awake or asleep. But awareness doesn't work in binary. It moves in gradients, pulses in rhythms, and stretches across layers. Consciousness isn't a light, it's a dimmer. Neuroscience suggests that consciousness has levels, from deep dreamless sleep to full alertness, from fragmented sensations to unified awareness. But it also has types, distinct expressions of experience that serve different purposes. Let's start with levels. At the base is unconsciousness, not just sleep, but deep anesthesia or coma, states where brain activity becomes disconnected, scattered, or silent. The body may still function, but there's no coherent experience tying it all together. Above that is minimal consciousness, brief flickers of awareness like moments in light sleep or in certain brain injuries. The mind drifts, perception is fragmentary, memory may never form. Then comes ordinary waking consciousness, our default mode. Sights, sounds, thoughts, memories, everything stitched into a single stream. It feels seamless, but even this state is a balancing act between attention and distraction, control and autopilot. Higher still is the flow state. Complete immersion. Time distorts. Self-awareness fades. Athletes, artists, and programmers describe this as peak performance, where action and awareness merge. It's not hyper-awareness, it's focused awareness. Then there are altered states, induced through meditation, psychedelics, trance, or sensory deprivation. These states can bring radical shifts in perception, identity, and time. Some feel expansive, others disorienting. But all reveal that consciousness isn't fixed, it's elastic. And above all, there's meta-consciousness, the awareness of awareness itself. When you reflect on your thoughts, question your attention, or catch yourself drifting, you're stepping outside the stream and watching the water move. But levels are only half the story. There are also types of consciousness, each serving different roles. Sensory consciousness is tied to the external world. Sight, sound, touch. It's the window into reality. Emotional consciousness gives feeling to experience, coloring thoughts with urgency, memory with meaning. Self-consciousness is the mind's ability to recognize itself as a subject, to say not just pain exists, but I am in pain. Social consciousness models the minds of others, what they know, want, feel. Without it, there's no empathy, no culture. Temporal consciousness gives you time, the ability to recall a past, imagine a future, and understand the present as a moving line. So how many levels are there? Technically, dozens. Some researchers map 5, others suggest hundreds. But maybe the point isn't the number. Maybe what matters is the range. From silence to symphony, from instinct to introspection. The more layers we recognize, the more we understand that consciousness isn't a state we enter. It's a field we move through. One that bends, folds, stretches, and sometimes even vanishes. Are there universal laws of minds? It turns out there might be. The first clue is this: minds don't just react, they predict. Your brain is constantly guessing what's about to happen. What word comes next, where the ball will land, how someone might respond. It doesn't wait for reality. It prepares for it. This is the foundation of what scientists call predictive processing. At the core of predictive processing is an idea borrowed from probability theory, Bayes' theorem. It's a rule for updating beliefs in light of new evidence. Your mind does this effortlessly. It holds expectations, priors, and adjusts them as the world feeds back new information. If your brain expects silence but hears a loud bang, it quickly revises its model of the moment. This process, prediction, error, correction, is happening constantly, even as you read this. From this loop emerges something powerful: efficiency. The brain doesn't waste energy processing every detail from scratch. It fills in gaps, glosses over redundancies, smooths over noise. That's why you don't notice the blind spot in your vision, or why you sometimes mishear a sentence and only realize it seconds later. The mind is working ahead, stitching coherence on the fly. Another near-universal law is the tendency to seek patterns even when none exist. From constellations in the stars to faces in clouds, the brain tries to impose order. Pattern recognition is so core to our thinking that it underlies everything from reading to relationships. It's what helps us predict outcomes, anticipate danger, and find meaning in chaos. But it's not perfect. These mental shortcuts, what psychologists call heuristics, are fast and often helpful, but they also create predictable distortions: confirmation bias, availability bias, anchoring. These aren't random errors. They're systematic tendencies baked into the architecture of how minds simplify complexity. Even emotions follow rules. Across cultures, certain expressions, fear, joy, disgust, show up the same way. Emotional responses are not just feelings, they are data. They inform decisions, prioritize attention, and encode memory. In this way, emotion behaves like a regulatory system. weighting experiences, adjusting focus, shaping behaviour. Then there's memory. It doesn't store events like a hard drive. It compresses, edits, reconstructs. Your mind remembers not what happened, but what was meaningful. And meaning is governed by attention, emotion, and relevance, laws that apply across individuals and even across species. So are there universal laws for the mind? Not in the way physics has equations, but there are principles, loops, biases, tendencies that appear again and again. Prediction, compression, pattern seeking, error correction. These aren't quirks of individual minds. They're signatures of how minds make sense of the world. And the more we understand those rules, the more we begin to see thought not as a mystery, but as a process, a system, a rhythm, one that runs in us, through us, and perhaps beyond us. What are the limits of mind? We often speak about the power of the mind, how it imagines, predicts, solves, creates. But just as important is what it can't do, where it falters, where it reaches the edge of understanding and quietly stops. There are perceptual limits. You don't see all colours. You don't hear all frequencies. Your brain fills in visual blind spots without telling you. Even your memories are reconstructions, not recordings. The world you experience is a version, not the full source code. There are cognitive limits. Your attention can only hold a few things at once. You can't focus on everything. You rely on shortcuts, called heuristics, to get through the day. These shortcuts are efficient, but they come with biases, confirmation bias, hindsight bias, anchoring. You see what fits. You ignore what doesn't. And then there are deeper limits, structural ones, boundaries that may never be crossed. In the 18th century, philosopher Immanuel Kant proposed something profound, that the mind doesn't just perceive the world, it shapes it. He divided reality into 3 layers: the phenomenal world, the world as we experience it; the noumenal world, the world as it exists on its own, beyond our perception; and the transcendental structures, the built-in mental filters that shape all experience. Kant argued that space and time themselves are not properties of the world out there, but of the mind itself. In other words, we don't just look through a lens, we live inside it. And that lens has edges. Modern science echoes this. Some physicists suggest our minds evolved not to see truth, but to see what helps us survive. That what we call reality is a user interface, like icons on a desktop. Useful, but not the full picture. Then there's Gödel's incompleteness theorem. It showed that in any complex logical system, there will be truths that are real, but can't be proven within the system itself. What if the mind is such a system? What if some truths are beyond not just our current knowledge, but our capacity to ever know? This isn't defeatist, it's perspective. To know that the mind has limits is to understand what makes it precious. It shows us why mystery exists, not as a failure of reason, but as a horizon. So what are the limits of the mind? Some are biological, some are cognitive. Some may be baked into the very way perception works. But beyond every limit is a question. And beyond every question is the potential for humility, curiosity, and awe. The mind cannot grasp everything, but it can grasp that it cannot grasp everything. And that might be its deepest strength. What is the self, and is it an illusion? When you say I, who exactly are you talking about? It feels obvious. You're a person, a mind, a self. You remember your past. You think, you feel, you make choices. There's a sense of continuity, like you're the same person you were 5 years ago, just with more experiences stacked on top. But when we look closely, that feeling begins to blur. There's no single place in the brain where the self is stored. No central you sitting behind your eyes pulling the levers. Instead, identity seems to emerge from many systems working together. Memory, emotion, perception, attention, constantly syncing and reshaping. Some neuroscientists call it the default mode network, a set of regions in the brain that activate when you're not focused on the outside world. It's what constructs the inner monologue, the sense of autobiography. But that activity isn't constant. It changes, it flickers. And when it quiets, through meditation, psychedelics, trauma, or deep flow, the self can feel like it vanishes entirely. That's where things get strange. You can be fully conscious, fully aware, and yet feel no boundary between you and the world. People describe it as ego loss, self-dissolution, or simply presence, not emptiness, just absence of the usual narrator. So if the self can disappear, what was it to begin with? Some philosophers argue that the self is a narrative, a story the mind tells itself to organize experience. You aren't a single unchanging identity, but a collection of roles, habits, values, memories, preferences, all stitched together by memory and language. And because the story feels coherent, it feels like a real thing. But coherence is not permanence. The you that you remember from childhood thought differently, spoke differently, wanted different things. Your body changed. Your thoughts evolved. Your values shifted. So did your relationships, your beliefs, your fears. So what exactly stayed the same? Maybe nothing. In Buddhism, this idea is central. There is no fixed self, only a process. The mind clings to identity because it craves stability. But in truth, the self is like a flame, a shape that appears continuous, even though the material fueling it is always changing. Does that mean the self is fake? Not quite. It means it's functional. The self helps you make decisions, tell stories, build memories, hold relationships. It's a mental interface, a useful simplification that lets you operate in a world too complex to grasp all at once. So what is the self? A pattern, a habit, a story, an ongoing negotiation between biology, experience, memory, and attention. And is it an illusion? Only if you think it's something solid, something permanent, something separate from everything else. Because the deeper you look, the more the self dissolves into the system that made it. Can one mind truly understand another? You've lived inside your mind every second of your life. You know its rhythms, its thoughts, its contradictions, its memories that rise at the wrong time. You feel the full weight of your experiences, not just as facts, but as felt realities. And yet, no one else will ever inhabit that space, just like you'll never truly inhabit theirs. We share words, gestures, even moments of silence that feel meaningful. We say, "I know how you feel," and sometimes we really try to mean it. But what we're doing is guessing, trying to map one mind onto another, using only the fragments we can observe from the outside. This is the heart of what philosophers call the problem of other minds. You can see someone smile, cry, or tremble, but you can't directly access the feeling behind it. You infer, you empathize, but at some level, the experience is theirs alone. Even language, our best tool for bridging minds, is built on translation. I say grief, and you think of your own version, but is it the same as mine? Or just something close enough to pass as understanding? And yet, we do connect. Mirror neurons in your brain light up when you see someone else act or feel pain. It's not just metaphor. You physically simulate what you observe. That's empathy not as emotion, but as architecture. A body-level attempt to bridge the unbridgeable. Still, simulation isn't sameness. We don't merge. We reflect. We approximate. That's why misunderstandings happen even between people who love each other. Why you can feel lonely in a crowd. Why you can be perfectly articulate and still feel like no one truly gets it. But maybe full understanding was never the point. Maybe the goal isn't perfect translation, it's honest effort. The willingness to sit with someone else's experience without rushing to fix it or fully grasp it. Maybe understanding doesn't mean entering another mind. It means respecting its depth. Art tries to do this. Music, poetry, storytelling. They don't transfer experience directly, but they create echoes. They activate something familiar in someone else. Not a shared mind, but a shared resonance. So, can one mind truly understand another? Maybe not in totality, but it can try. It can listen. It can reflect. And in that attempt, it narrows the gap between inner worlds, even if just by a little. Because what matters most may not be perfect understanding. What matters is that someone else is trying to see you. And in that small act, the space between minds becomes something else entirely. Not a wall, but a bridge. Is there such a thing as objective truth? We like to think there is. That beneath all the noise, beyond opinion, emotion, culture, bias, there's a reality that simply is. Cold, clear, unchanging. A truth that doesn't care what we believe. But if that truth exists, how would we ever know we've found it? Your mind doesn't see the world directly. It receives fragments, light hitting the retina, vibrations entering the ear, chemicals on the tongue. Those signals are interpreted, shaped, and stitched together into experience. What you see isn't the world. It's your brain's model of it. And that model is influenced by everything: memory, expectation, mood, culture, language, belief. Two people can look at the same moment and come away with different truths. One sees kindness, the other sees manipulation. One sees danger, the other sees adventure. Which is the truth? In philosophy, this tension lives between realism and constructivism. Realism says, the truth is out there, independent of minds. Constructivism says truth is always filtered, constructed through perception, language, and thought. Maybe the world exists as it is, but we can only access it as it appears to us. Even science, our most rigorous tool for truth, works through models. It doesn't prove, it approximates. Gravity was once a force. Now it's a curve in space-time. Tomorrow, it might be something else. What we call truth is often just what hasn't been disproven yet. And then there's culture. In some languages, time flows left to right. In others, it flows east to west. Some cultures prioritize the group, others the individual. These aren't just preferences, they shape perception. Even what we notice gets filtered by what we believe matters. So, does this mean there's no objective truth? Not exactly. It means that truth, if it exists, is always seen through something, like sunlight through stained glass. The light is real, but the colors are shaped by the frame. Perhaps objective truth is not what we see, but what we agree to approach together. Not a fixed island, but a North Star. Something we aim for, knowing we may never fully arrive. We get glimpses of it when perspectives overlap, when multiple lenses converge on the same pattern, when math, observation, experience, and emotion all point to something that feels stable, less personal, more shared. And maybe that's enough. So, is there such a thing as objective truth? Maybe. But we never hold it in pure form. What we hold are versions, stories, models. Some clearer than others, some closer than others. And truth isn't weakened by this. It becomes something we strive for, not something we possess, not a trophy on a shelf, but a horizon the mind is forever walking toward. What is the philosophy of mind? You can think, you can feel, you can imagine a distant future and recall a childhood memory in the same breath. You can reflect on your own thoughts. But have you ever stopped to ask, what exactly is all of this? That question, simple, impossible, essential, is the root of an entire branch of philosophy, the philosophy of mind. It's not about theories of behaviour or diagnostic tools. It's not neuroscience or psychology, though it overlaps with both. It's the discipline that asks the hardest version of the simplest questions. What is a mind? What is consciousness? What does it mean to be something from the inside? At its core is the mind-body problem. How can something physical, the brain, give rise to something non-physical? Experience. Why does neural activity come with the texture of joy, pain, memory, awareness? Why doesn't the brain just compute silently like a machine? This is where the major positions begin to unfold. Dualism, most famously proposed by Descartes, says the mind and body are two fundamentally different substances, the physical world and the world of experience. But if they're separate, how do they interact? Materialism says there's only one thing, matter. The mind is just what the brain does. But this leads to another question. If the brain is just firing neurons, why does it feel like anything to be you? Some philosophers argue that consciousness is emergent, a property that arises only when the brain becomes complex enough. Others lean toward functionalism, the idea that what matters isn't the material, but the pattern. If a system processes information in the right way, it has a mind, whether it's made of neurons, silicon, or something else entirely. Then there's panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is fundamental, not something that emerges from matter, but something that exists alongside it, everywhere. In this view, even atoms may carry a glimmer of awareness, and minds are just more organized expressions of it. Philosophy of mind also asks about qualia, the raw feel of experience, the redness of red, the taste of mint, the ache of missing someone. These aren't things we can measure. They're private, subjective, and yet they are the most undeniable parts of being alive. And then there's the self. Are you a fixed thing, or a process, an illusion, a story told in real time by the brain to maintain continuity? The philosophy of mind doesn't claim to have all the answers, but it gives you the framework to ask the questions precisely and to notice which ones bend under their own weight. So, what is the philosophy of mind? It's the scaffolding beneath every question you've ever had about thinking, feeling, dreaming, being. Not a map of the mind, but a mirror held up to it. What is dreaming mind? You close your eyes, the world goes quiet, and then, without warning, another world appears. You're flying, or falling, or speaking to someone long gone. The sky might be green, time might reverse, nothing follows the rules, and yet, it feels real. This is the dreaming mind, one of the most mysterious states the human brain can enter. Every night, without effort or instruction, your mind creates a theatre of experience, sometimes abstract, sometimes emotional, sometimes so vivid that waking up feels like leaving something behind. But what exactly is a dream? Biologically, Most dreams occur during REM sleep, a phase where the brain becomes active while the body stays still. Your eyes twitch beneath closed lids. Your heart rate fluctuates. Neurons fire almost as intensely as they do during waking life, but your muscles are paralyzed. You're locked inside. Still, this doesn't explain the experience of dreaming, the narrative, the imagery, the emotion. Where do these stories come from? Some scientists say dreams are just neural noise, the brain's way of sorting, cleaning, and filing memories, a kind of nightly defragmentation. Others argue that dreams serve a deeper role, simulating threats, solving problems, integrating emotion, a rehearsal space for life, built from fragments of memory and emotion. And then there's another view, that dreams are a mirror. They reflect what the conscious mind avoids: repressed fears, unprocessed feelings, unfinished thoughts. Carl Jung believed dreams revealed the shadow self, the parts of us we hide during the day. But not all dreams are random or symbolic. In lucid dreams, the dreamer becomes aware they're dreaming and sometimes even takes control, flying on purpose, visiting a place from memory, asking the dream itself questions. It's consciousness folded inward, an awareness inside an illusion, and aware that it's an illusion. Strangely, dreams can feel more true than waking life. You remember them not as thoughts, but as experiences. Emotions are amplified, logic is fluid, identities bend. You might dream of being yourself, but different, or not yourself at all. And yet, it still feels like you were there. This raises a deeper question. What is the self in a dream? If your body is sleeping and your memories are scrambled, but you still feel like someone, who exactly is that someone? And if the mind can simulate a world so convincingly while asleep, how can we be sure the waking mind isn't doing something similar? The dreaming mind is not just the sleeping mind, it's the creative mind unleashed, the emotional mind unfiltered, the conscious mind unbound by rules. So what is the dreaming mind? It's a system that doesn't just process reality, it invents it. A painter with no brush, a traveller with no map, a self that flickers and reforms with each passing scene. And yet, night after night, it builds a world from silence and leaves you wondering each morning which version of you was more real. Why did evolution give rise to dreaming? Before language, before logic, before waking thought took shape, the mind was already dreaming. Every species that dreams inherits a puzzle. Why invest in hallucinations during your most vulnerable hours? Why let the brain generate worlds that aren't even real? The answer may lie in the fact that the dreaming mind came first. Some scientists believe that dreaming isn't a side effect of sleep. It's the foundation that consciousness was built on. The dreaming brain came online long before humans walked the earth. Reptiles, birds, and mammals all show signs of dreamlike activity. That makes dreaming not just human, but ancient, deeply conserved, selected somehow, again and again. One reason? Dreaming may be the first form of mental simulation. Before animals could plan, they had to predict. Before they could think, they had to rehearse. Dreaming may have provided the original rehearsal engine, primitive but effective. Long before conscious strategy emerged, dreams may have given early brains the advantage of previewing possibilities. In this way, dreaming didn't evolve to be interpreted. It evolved to train the system without the risk of movement, a virtual landscape where instincts could be shaped by experience, not remembered experience, but internal, generative practice. evolution's first internal prototype lab. There's also the question of neural development. In mammals, especially infants, dreaming occupies a massive portion of sleep. Human babies spend up to 50% of their sleep time in dream-rich states. Yet they don't have memories, no language, no structured learning. Why dream? One possibility is that dreams are used to scaffold the brain, to help build cognitive architecture before waking life fills it. Like scaffolding around a structure still under construction, dreaming may allow early neural systems to wire themselves up using internally generated signals. This might explain why dreaming remains prominent even in adulthood. Though less frequent, it continues, possibly to reinforce cognitive flexibility. In a world that keeps changing, the brain needs ways to restructure itself without starting from scratch. Dreaming may provide those nightly micro-adjustments, not to replay the day, but to reshape how the brain relates to the future. Another idea looks beyond individuals to evolutionary stability. Dreaming may have created a kind of behavioural buffer. By offloading certain mental processes into the night, like instinct rehearsal or emotional priming, daytime behaviour could become more efficient, responsive, and stable. Over generations, organisms that could adapt internally while sleeping may have outperformed those that couldn't. So why did evolution give rise to dreaming? Because it gave early minds a place to run before they could walk, to model danger without entering it, to rehearse without risk, to wire themselves from within. Dreaming wasn't an accident of sleep. It was a leap into virtual space, and evolution chose to keep that leap alive. What is the role of language for the mind? Before language, there was sensation, the sound of water, the scent of danger, the pulse of hunger. Minds responded to the world, shaped by reflex, shaped by pattern, but they couldn't describe what they felt. They couldn't name it. They couldn't carry it forward. Then came language, and the mind changed forever. At first glance, language seems like a tool for communication. We use it to express wants, ask questions, tell stories. But its role goes far deeper. Language doesn't just let us share thoughts, it shapes them. The moment you name something, you divide it from everything else. A feeling becomes anger. A memory becomes childhood. A thought becomes true or false. Language gives form to the formless. It turns waves of experience into structured units the mind can hold, compare, and revisit. Without language, thoughts exist, but they float. Language ties them down. It lets the mind build chains of logic, layers of metaphor, structures of meaning. It allows you to stack ideas, nest them, break them apart, and build them again. Language is not just how the mind speaks, it's how the mind organizes. It also reshapes time. With language, you don't just remember the past, you narrate it. You don't just imagine the future, you script it. You tell yourself stories about who you were, who you are, who you might become, and those stories become identity. Some scientists believe inner speech, that voice in your head, is crucial for self-awareness. It's how the mind keeps track of itself. Without it, decisions become harder. Self-control fades, planning weakens. In this view, language is not just for talking to others, it's for talking to yourself. Language also allows for abstraction. You can think about justice, freedom, time, God, concepts that don't exist in the physical world. You can combine words that never met before, invisible cities, digital souls, broken clocks that still tell the truth. Each phrase builds a new mental space, a place that couldn't exist without names. But language also has limits. It simplifies, compresses, leaves things out. A word like love might mean something different to everyone who hears it. The more we name, the more we risk mistaking the label for the thing itself. Not everything the mind feels can be wrapped in syllables. Still, without language, the mind remains mostly private, fast, intuitive, but difficult to unpack. Language is what lets thoughts become shareable, repeatable, and recordable. It creates minds that can not only think, but think together. So what is the role of language for the mind? It is memory extended, identity shaped, thought structured, and imagination set free. Language didn't just give the mind a voice, it gave it scaffolding and turned raw experience into architecture. Did language create the voice in your head? You know the one, the narrator, the commentator, the voice that rehearses conversations, writes imaginary letters, narrates your choices as you make them. The one that sometimes won't shut up. But where did it come from? And was it always there? It feels like the voice in your head is the most private, essential part of being you. But some researchers suggest it might be one of the most recent, a product not of nature, but of language. Before we learn to speak, we still have minds. Babies react, they feel, remember, explore. But they don't think in words. Their thoughts are visual, emotional, sensory. Language is something layered on top of those early experiences. And as words begin to take shape, so does the voice that uses them. Psychologist Lev Vygotsky believed that language begins outside the mind, between people. A child hears others speak, then they start talking aloud to themselves. Gradually, that speech turns inward. It softens into silence. It becomes internal dialogue. The voice in the head is born from conversations that once needed sound. But it's more than just a whispering habit. Language gives the mind a new tool: narration. Once you can describe something, you can reflect on it. You can label your emotions, reframe your past, plan your future. The inner voice becomes a manager, organizing, editing, explaining. It helps maintain continuity. It reminds you who you are. And yet it also creates friction. That voice can loop, judge, rehearse worst-case scenarios. It can talk over experience. It can drown out silence. For many, it becomes not just a narrator, but a noise they can't control. Interestingly, not everyone experiences the inner voice the same way. Some people report mostly images, shapes, impulses. Others say they hear multiple voices, each with its own tone, opinion, or agenda. The inner monologue is not as universal as we assume. It's shaped by culture, development, and personality. And what about non-linguistic minds? Do animals have an inner voice? Probably not in the way we do. They think, react, solve problems. But without language, there's no running commentary, no constructed self in narrative form. There may be awareness, but no script. So did language create the voice in your head? Not entirely, but it gave it vocabulary, structure, a place to live. Language turns scattered thoughts into sentences. It turned the mind into a room where one part of you can speak and another part can listen. It's not the only way to think, but it's one of the loudest. And maybe that's why so many spiritual traditions emphasize quieting the inner voice, not to silence the mind, but to remember that before language, the mind still was, and beneath all the words, it still is. What is psychology? We often think of psychology as a field of therapy sessions, personality types, or diagnostic labels, emotions on a chart, disorders in a manual. But that's just the surface. Psychology is something deeper. It's the study of the human mind, not through philosophy or poetry, but through observation. measurement, patterns. It asks, what do people do? Why do they do it? And what, underneath it all, is the mind really up to? But this wasn't always possible. For most of history, the mind was considered invisible. You couldn't touch it, weigh it, or observe it directly. It belonged to religion, to introspection, to mystery. But in the late 19th century, something shifted. People began asking, what if we could study the mind like a natural system? What if thoughts, emotions, and behaviour followed laws we could uncover? The birth of psychology came not with answers, but with a decision to bring the mind into the realm of science. And that decision split the field. Some psychologists focused on behaviour, the external, things you could observe and measure. They studied reaction times, learning curves, reflexes. If it couldn't be seen or tested, it didn't count. This became behaviourism, an attempt to make psychology as rigorous as physics. Others looked inward. They believed the mind couldn't be understood without the inner world. Attention, memory, desire, pain. These psychologists studied introspection, dreams, emotional recall. It was messier, but it felt closer to experience. Today, psychology stands between those poles. It studies not just how people act, but how they think, feel, and decide. It maps attention. It models emotion. It analyzes motivation. It searches for the patterns behind irrational behavior, why we procrastinate, why we lash out, why we fall in love. But deeper still, psychology is trying to understand one thing. What drives the human animal? What keeps us moving? What derails us? What makes us repeat, avoid, sabotage, change? Psychology isn't about labeling minds. It's about uncovering the logic inside the chaos. It tells us that thought isn't always rational, that emotion isn't the opposite of logic. It's often the foundation of it. That memory lies. That perception is biased. That two people can walk through the same room and live two completely different experiences. And in doing this, psychology offers more than insight. It offers empathy. It shows that behind every action, no matter how strange, sudden, or self-defeating, there is a mind trying to make sense of its world. So what is psychology? It's not just the study of behaviour. It's the science of what it feels like to be human, and why that feeling sometimes misfires. It's not a cure for the mind, but it is a mirror held up to it, one that asks quietly, continuously, not just what are you doing, but why are you doing it that way? What is behaviour? We often think of behaviour as action, movement, the things people do. Someone laughs, hesitates, lashes out, walks away, and we say, that's behaviour. But behaviour isn't just motion. It's meaningful motion. It's the mind turned outward, expressing itself not in thoughts or feelings, but in decisions, in rhythms, in visible, measurable patterns. You don't always know what someone is thinking, but you can see what they do. And that's why behaviour became psychology's first language. It's observable, trackable, a living print of how the mind is adapting to the world. At its core, behaviour is a response to conditions, not always conscious, not always rational, but always shaped by some internal logic. The brain doesn't wait for perfect information. It reads the moment, and the body moves. Scratch an itch, blink, check your phone, fidget while waiting. These aren't mistakes. They're small-scale strategies. Tiny calibrations between your internal state and your environment. The body adjusting itself without needing to ask permission. And some behaviours stretch far beyond the moment. Habits, routines, avoidance patterns. Reactions that replay long after the original cause is gone. The mind learns from past outcomes and builds behavioral shortcuts. Sometimes those shortcuts work, sometimes they don't. But the behavior stays because it's familiar, because it's served once. Behavior also encodes emotion. You can't always say what you feel, but your posture can, your pace, the way you enter a room. Emotion lives in movement. It doesn't hide inside you. It leaks into gestures, tone, micro-expressions. That's why you can sense tension before a word is spoken. And behavior isn't always reactive. It can be predictive. You prepare, position, posture yourself based on what might happen. That's why someone steps back before being pushed. Why we glance toward exits before a conversation ends. Behavior constantly anticipates. Even stillness can be behavior. A held breath, a clenched jaw, silence in a moment that demands a reply. The absence of action isn't emptiness. It's a message, a choice, a signal sent without sound. And here's the twist. Not all behavior is your own. Much of what we do is coordinated, mimicked, mirrored, shaped by social feedback. We pick up mannerisms, tone, posture, phrasing, not consciously, but automatically. We sync, we match, we blend. Because fitting in was once a matter of survival. So what is behavior really? It's not just what you do, it's how your mind navigates the world through action. It's memory, mood, instinct, and anticipation, expressed as movement. Not a symptom, not a mistake, but a language. One the body speaks fluently, even when the mind stays silent. Can the mind be simulated? It's one of the most haunting questions of our time. If a mind is just a system made of parts, patterns, processes, then in theory, it should be copyable. A mind made of silicon instead of cells. A digital consciousness. A machine that doesn't just act like us, but feels like us. But is that really possible? To simulate a mind, we'd need more than surface behavior. Not just a machine that can play chess or answer questions. We'd need a system that can feel joy, imagine futures, dread loss, reflect on its own thinking. We'd need to recreate consciousness, the spark, not just the wiring. Some scientists believe this is a matter of complexity. If we can model every neuron in the human brain, roughly 86 billion of them, and their trillions of connections, we might capture the essence of mind. This is the idea behind whole brain emulation. Scan the brain, map the structure, rebuild it in code. In this view, the brain isn't magical, it's mechanical. And if thought is what the brain does, then a simulated brain could think too. But there's a problem. A perfect simulation of water doesn't get anything wet. A perfect simulation of fire doesn't produce heat. So if we simulate a brain, does it actually feel? Or is it just acting like it does? That's the mystery at the heart of this question. Is the mind about function or about feel? Functionalists say, if it behaves like a mind, it is a mind. If it reacts, reflects, feels pain when injured, joy when rewarded, then that's enough. Whether it's neurons or microchips doesn't matter. The software is the self. But others argue that consciousness depends on biology, that there's something about the wet, organic, living nature of the brain that can't be replicated in metal and code. You might recreate the behavior, but never the awareness. And even if we could simulate a mind, whose mind would it be? Would we copy an individual, memories and all, or build something entirely new? Would it start as a blank slate, or wake up with a self? Could it suffer? Could it grow? Could it want anything at all? And then there's the ethical question. If a simulated mind can suffer, are we responsible for it? Can we switch it off? So, can the mind be simulated? Maybe. Technologically, we're getting closer. The models are growing more sophisticated. The lines between biological and artificial thought are starting to blur. But philosophically, we may still be in the dark. Because even if we succeed, we might not know if the light inside that simulation is real. And until then, the mystery of the mind remains. Not just how to understand it, but how to recreate the thing that asks the question in the first place. What is average general intelligence? We often treat intelligence like a number, a score, something you can plot on a graph and circle in red ink. But what we call general intelligence, or G, isn't a single skill. It's a pattern, a current that runs underneath problem solving, memory, reasoning, and adaptation. It's not what you know, it's how you learn. General intelligence is the ability to deal with complexity, to recognize patterns, to apply past knowledge to new situations, and to do all of that across different kinds of tasks: math, language, spatial reasoning, social situations. The term G emerged from the work of Charles Spearman in the early 1900s. He noticed something strange. Students who did well in one area, say vocabulary, tended to do well in others, like math or memory. This suggested a shared cognitive engine running beneath all mental tasks. That engine is what we now call general intelligence. But what about average intelligence? Psychologists typically set the average IQ score at 100. It's not a cosmic truth. It's a statistical choice. On a bell curve, most people cluster around the middle. That's what average means here. Not typical experience, not potential, but placement relative to others in specific cognitive tasks. But intelligence is slippery. It doesn't unfold the same way in everyone. Some minds solve puzzles without words. Some remember everything but struggle to plan. Some are brilliant in abstract ideas but miss emotional cues. That's why average is such a tricky word. It doesn't mean normal. It doesn't mean limited. It just means somewhere in the middle of a very complicated distribution. And even G doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't measure creativity, or kindness, or curiosity. It doesn't capture the kind of intelligence it takes to de-escalate a tense room, or sense what's left unsaid in a conversation. It doesn't track how fast someone learns when they actually care about the subject. And yet, general intelligence still matters. It predicts how well someone might navigate unfamiliar problems, how quickly they adapt to changing rules. It's a kind of cognitive flexibility, an ability to shift, reframe, and find structure in the unknown. But there's something humbling about average intelligence, because even at the middle of the curve, the human mind remains extraordinary. It can imagine futures, build tools, compose music, reflect on its own reflection. It's not the number that's impressive. It's the fact that even so-called average minds contain language, memory, vision, desire, fear, and the ability to wonder where it all comes from. So what is average general intelligence? It's not a ceiling, not a label, not a limit. It's a statistical midpoint in a species capable of symphonies and spacecraft. And maybe what matters more than where your mind lands on a chart is what it chooses to build with the space it's been given. What have the greatest minds said about the mind? For thousands of years, some of the most curious, brilliant, and restless minds have turned inward, not to find answers, but to better ask the question, what is this thing that thinks? Socrates once said, "Know thyself," not as a slogan, but as a mission. He believed that the unexamined mind, the one that never questions, never reflects, isn't truly living. For him, to understand the mind was to begin understanding what it means to be human. Descartes, centuries later, doubted everything: the senses, the body, even the stars, until he arrived at one undeniable fact: I think, therefore I am. To him, the very act of thinking was proof of existence. The mind was not just a product of being, it was the foundation of it. David Hume had a different take. He looked into himself and found no core, no center, only fleeting sensations and thoughts. He wrote, "I never can catch myself at any time without a perception." For him, the self wasn't a thing. It was a stream, always changing. Buddha went further. He taught that the mind clings to identity out of fear, that what we call a self is just a bundle of processes. He described the mind not as a fixed object, but as a flame, flickering moment to moment. William James, the father of modern psychology, called consciousness a stream, too. Not a single thing, but a flow, continuous, changing, ungraspable. He said the mind wasn't a thing to be captured, but a field to be explored. Carl Jung believed the mind was deeper than we realize, that beneath our individual thoughts lies a collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of memory and symbol passed through generations. He said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Alan Turing, who helped invent the modern computer, asked if a machine could think, and in doing so, forced us to ask what we mean by thinking. He blurred the line between artificial and human minds, not with answers, but with a question we're still living with today. Patricia Churchland, a modern philosopher, reminds us that the brain is not a ghost box. She writes, "The mind is what the brain does, and yet, even in this clarity, mystery remains." Each of these minds disagreed with the others. Each saw from a different angle, but they all touched something invisible, something you can't point to but feel every day. So what have the greatest minds said about the mind? That it is a stream, a flame, a mirror, a mystery. That it is not just what you have, but what you are, and what quietly you are always becoming. Does universe only exist because of mind? We assume the universe is out there, solid, silent, indifferent. Galaxies spin, stars collapse, time flows forward. But at some point, one small corner of it became aware. A mind opened, and in that opening, the question formed. What is all of this? And more unsettling still, would any of it exist without a mind to ask? Physics doesn't flinch at this question. In fact, it quietly invites it. The anthropic principle says the universe appears the way it does, because we're here to observe it. Not that it was made for us, but that it had to be this way for us to even ask. Out of all possible combinations of physical laws, we live in one that allows minds to emerge. Coincidence or necessity? Then there's quantum theory, where particles don't seem to settle into definite states until they're observed, until measured, until witnessed. It's as if reality holds its breath, waiting to be noticed. Some physicists say this is just math. Others say it might be telling us something deeper. Could it be that observation is not a byproduct of the universe, but one of its pillars? Philosophers like George Berkeley believed the world only exists because it's perceived. He wrote, "To be is to be perceived. Without a mind, a tree falling in a forest doesn't just make no sound. It might not even be there in any meaningful way." More recently, thinkers like John Wheeler proposed the idea of a participatory universe. That reality isn't a static stage, but an unfolding script, written only as it's read. In his words, "The universe does not exist out there, independent of us." Of course, this doesn't mean the stars vanish when you blink, or that the moon disappears when you sleep, but it raises a possibility that mind and cosmos are not separate but entangled. That what we call the universe is only half the equation. The other half is awareness, And here's the twist. If no mind had ever appeared, would we even be asking if the universe exists? So, does the universe only exist because of mind? Maybe not in substance. Maybe the atoms, the fields, the dark matter all persist regardless. But the experience of a universe, a sky, a moment, a question, requires a witness, a consciousness, a mind. Without that, the cosmos might still spin. But there would be no one to know it had ever spun at all. And in that sense, the universe may not need minds to be real, but it might need them to be meaningful. Will we ever understand the mind completely? We've mapped its anatomy, named its lobes, tracked its pulses, watched neurons light up like constellations. We've built theories, models, machines. We've broken it into parts: emotion, memory, attention, self. And yet it slips. The more closely we look, the more the mind seems to blur under the microscope. Like a dream you can't quite remember. Like a voice fading just as you begin to listen. Why? Maybe because the mind is not just the object of study, but the tool doing the studying. A mirror trying to reflect itself. A flame trying to see its own fire. Every insight is filtered through the very thing it's trying to reveal. Some scientists believe we're close, that once we model enough neurons, once we decode the full complexity of the brain, the mystery will collapse into understanding. Others disagree. They say there's something about experience, subjective, first-person, raw, that no scan can ever capture. Philosopher Thomas Nagel once asked, "What is it like to be a bat?" Not in behaviour or biology, but in experience. The bat's sonar, its spatial sense, its pulse of the world. That question still echoes. Because even if we explain how the mind works, do we ever fully know what it feels like to be someone or something else? There's also the question of limits, not of knowledge, but of cognition itself. Maybe the mind was designed to survive, not to understand itself. A flashlight can't light up the bulb inside itself. It was never meant to. But maybe that's not a failure. Maybe the mind isn't something to be solved like a puzzle, but listened to like a song. Understood not in full, but in rhythm, in mood, in motion. Because the very act of wondering, of searching, reflecting, asking, is already part of what it means to have a mind. To chase questions you know may never settle, to explore the landscape of thought, even if the map is always shifting. So will we ever understand the mind completely? Maybe not. But maybe we don't need to. Maybe the beauty of the mind isn't in its clarity, but in its depth, in the way it can ask, feel, imagine, dream. And maybe the deepest understanding of the mind is the quiet awe of realizing you're inside one. What will future minds be like? The mind you're using to hear these words is a product of deep time. Millions of years shaped its circuits. Stone tools, firelight, language, memory. Evolution didn't design it to understand particle physics or code or galaxies. It designed it to survive, to bond, to wonder. But now, something is shifting. For the first time in history, a mind has begun to redesign itself. With machines, with chemicals, with wires and code and questions no other species has ever asked. So what comes next? Some say the future mind will be faster. Memory that never fades. Thought speed untethered from biology. Access to libraries of information. Not learned, but streamed. A kind of synthetic intuition. Knowledge not earned by study, but downloaded in seconds. Others imagine the mind becoming more interconnected. Not individual, but shared. Collective minds, linked by neural interfaces, networked consciousness. What one person feels, another could feel instantly. Empathy not as an effort, but as architecture. Or maybe the future mind won't be human at all. Maybe it will be built in silicon, trained by data, awake, but not like us. Minds that don't tire, don't sleep, don't dream, unless we teach them how. Minds that don't carry fear or joy or identity in the way we do, but still, somehow think. And what happens to us then? Some believe we'll merge with them, augment ourselves, blend biology with machine, keep our sense of self but stretch it. Others think we'll split, that artificial minds will evolve on their own path, and we'll watch, unsure if we've given birth to a mirror, or to something else entirely. But not all future minds will be technological. Some will be inward, meditative, minimalist, intentional. Minds that train themselves not to multitask faster, but to slow down, to see clearly, to suffer less. The future mind may be not just augmented, but awakened. And maybe it won't be either or. Maybe the future will hold multitudes, digital minds in orbit, quiet minds in forests, minds exploring the far edge of intelligence while others return to something ancient, simpler, still. Because a mind is not just a tool. It's not just memory or speed or language. It's a way of relating to reality. And in the future, that relationship may look very different, but it will still be asking the same quiet question. What am I? Where am I going? And what else could I become? So what will future minds be like? Faster maybe, stranger certainly, but also still searching. And maybe that's what will never change. What does the mind reveal about ultimate reality? Throughout history, we have tried to use the mind to understand the world around us. We developed language, science, mathematics, and philosophy. We created systems to measure, predict, and model reality. But every system we build is limited by the structure of the mind itself. The mind interprets. It simplifies complexity into usable patterns. It compresses information. It highlights what matters for survival and filters out what doesn't. It does not record reality directly. It builds a manageable version of it. From this, one fact becomes clear. The mind does not experience reality as it truly is. It experiences reality as it can be processed. Sensory limitations, cognitive biases, emotional weighting, all these influence what we perceive and how we understand it. The mind is not a transparent window onto the universe. It is an active processor. What we call the world is already heavily reconstructed before we are even aware of it. This does not mean ultimate reality does not exist. It likely does. But the version of it we interact with is shaped at every level by the mind's operating constraints. Color, sound, time, selfhood, all emerge from how biological systems interact with external inputs. In physics, models like quantum theory challenge the idea that an objective world sits unchanged behind observation. At subatomic levels, phenomena seem defined partly by measurement itself. This suggests that observation, the act of mind noticing, may participate in forming what we call reality. However, participation is not creation. Ultimate reality is not an invention of mind. It is the underlying structure that the mind attempts, imperfectly, to model. Thus, the mind reveals several key things about ultimate reality. First, reality is not directly accessible without distortion. Second, any model we build of it is provisional, limited by cognitive architecture. Third, while complete understanding may be impossible, partial, functional understanding is possible and has allowed us to survive, evolve, and build civilizations. In the end, the mind does not reveal what ultimate reality is in itself. It reveals what reality appears to be when processed through a particular type of evolved cognitive system. And recognizing this limitation is not a defeat. It is the beginning of using the mind more carefully, aware of both its power and its boundaries. Ultimate reality likely exists independent of our thoughts about it, but every thought we have about it passes through the filter of mind. Understanding that filter is as close as we may ever get.